Hey guys, Chris here with the Good Old Gamer. So I wanted to thank everybody for the overwhelmingly positive and supportive comments that I received on the last video. Because of that, I really want to go ahead and continue with the channel, which I did anyway, but with the feedback out there, a lot of you guys were like, hey, if you just pop on, give us your opinions on a couple of things, just do a quick, easy video. That's something that I promise that I'm going to try to do moving forward. But this video is something that I wanted to do, and I'm not starting my job till next week, so I'm like, I have a little bit of time, so let's go ahead and get this going. And like I said, at that point, once I am working the two jobs and I'm working 7 days a week, 365 days a year, this is something that I can promise to you guys is that I'm going to try to at least do something and give you my take on what's going on out there. So today we finally have the release of Raven Ridge on the desktop platform. And this is a pretty interesting little dynamic that we see going on. We see better value at the same or lower prices compared to the older Ryzen 3 and Ryzen 5 CPUs. So let's go ahead and kind of take a look at what's going on there. Then after that, I want to give you my thoughts on CPU buying. And if you're looking at something for now and then possibly upgrading in the future, and you want to basically be as efficient with your money as possible and get the best bang for your buck, I'm going to give you my 2 cents on which way to go here, comparing both AMD and Intel, and the reason why looking at the platform is so important. But first, let's go check out Raven Ridge. So today we only have 2 variants, the Ryzen 5 2400G and the Ryzen 3 2200G. The Ryzen 5 starting at $169 and the Ryzen 3 at only $99. Now the biggest difference is we have 11 compute units on the Ryzen 5, and we have 8 on the Ryzen 3. Now, we also have hyper-threading on the Ryzen 5 versus the Ryzen 3. Those are really the 2 major differences there, but in reality, the GPU difference is the primary difference between the 2. The extra threads do come in handy in certain tasks, but overall, they're both quad-core CPUs at the end of the day. And what's a little bit different is the fact that they changed their cache structure. So we only have 4 megabytes of L3 cache on these CPUs as compared to the Ryzen 1200 and 1300, which had 8 megabytes. Interestingly enough, and as you will see, this actually hasn't led to a real performance decrease. So the cache optimizations that they've implemented on Raven Ridge, which will be coming to the Ryzen 2000 series here in the near future as well, seems to be rather effective. Also, what's really nice are the CPUs are targetable between 46 and 65 watt TDP, so these are very power efficient, even though they're also packing a highly competitive Vega GPU on the die. Another interesting little point is the DDR4 2933 standard is now supported out of the box. So what this means is they've been able to increase their memory compatibility, hopefully. This is something I haven't seen tested yet, but it looks like it's just going to be a lot easier to get towards DDR4 3000, which shouldn't be too much harder getting to 3200, which seems to be a sweet spot, as we will see here in a moment. So just taking a quick look at some basic benchmarks, looking at the Cinebench R15. By the way, this is TechSpot. If you are unfamiliar, the link is in the description below. These articles are done by Steve from Hardware Unboxed, and out of everybody on the internet, I trust his numbers more than anybody. So you can go ahead and give him a shout on his video. I'll put the link to his video and to this article in the description below. But the first thing that I noticed is we have the 2400G 4-core 8-thread CPU competing with the 6-core 6-thread i5 from Intel. And this is kind of where we're going to see the competition for the most part. These CPUs tend to trade blows throughout most of these benchmarks. One will be faster in one benchmark, one will be faster in the other, but overall, very, very close in performance here. And then the 2200G is keeping up right up there with the 8100. Even though it might be a half a step behind, we're not talking about a major difference here. So it's really nice to see that they're very close to their Intel counterparts, and they are priced a little bit more budget friendly, so there's a little bit of extra value there. As you will see, that's not the case in all of the benchmarks, as you have the 2400G down here, and even the 8100, it's doing much better. But then there are other benchmarks where they're much, much closer. So like I said, it just depends on which benchmarks we're looking at, but overall performance seems to be relatively similar, just about a half a step behind for the AMD CPUs. But then once you get to iGPU, as is no surprise to anybody, it's pretty much game over. The Intel iGPU is just not going to compete with a Vega class GPU. What is interesting, however, though, is the Ryzen 5 2400G competes very nicely with the GeForce GT 1030. In fact, overall, they'll switch places on and off. It's very close. There are certain games that are very heavily NVIDIA optimized, such as PUBG here. And then there are games like Overwatch, which just prefer the AMD GPUs. So they kind of trade blows there. So a discrete graphics card of the GT 1030 caliber is about on par with the Vega 11. And the Vega 8 isn't too much further behind, somewhere about 20%, which, looking at the math there, that's about correct. But it does make this the most powerful APU on the market at this particular point in time if GPU productivity or gaming is one of your focuses. Now, Steve decided to use the GT 1030 and the RX 550, which are entry-level GPUs, to kind of compare all of his testing here. And if we take a look at this, you can see you have the 2200G right here, and then you have the 8100. And then there's a little bit of a difference here on the minimum frames per second. Steve tested this with only 2400 memory because that's what the i3 8100 will be limited to on a reasonably priced motherboard, an H-series motherboard. And this is running at 3200 megahertz memory. So the main difference here is likely due to the faster memory on the 2200G. So it's not apples to apples, but if we look at the average, we're looking at relatively the same performance there. Now moving up to 1080p. That difference is now gone. The minimums are a little bit lower on the Ryzen CPU, but overall, relatively similar between the 8100 and the 2200. I really wish he had the i5 8400 on here so I could see where the 2200 compared. But unfortunately, that is not an option. But we can see how the 4-core 8-thread APU compares with the other 4-core 8-thread APUs. And as you can see, it's relatively the same. We have 64 versus 69. So the extra cache available on the Ryzen 5 1500X does help, but it's not a huge difference. It does help a little bit though. Now this is where things get pretty impressive. So this is using a GTX 1080 Ti, so we're not using the integrated graphics. The Ryzen 3 pulls 117 watts under load, CPU load, and only 46 watts under idle, and 125 on the 2400G and 47 at idle. Now the idles are lower than any of the other counterparts on here. And the reason for this, the main reason why I believe that these are a little bit lower are the Raven Ridge APUs are designed for mobile. That's what they're designed for. So they're probably more aggressive in their power savings target numbers. So that's likely the reason why they can get a little bit lower. Now, the 2200G is consuming a little bit more power than the 8100 under load, but the 2400G is far behind the 8400. So there's 2 extra cores here, so that actually does make a lot of sense if you think about it. But then when you see the Ryzen 8-core CPU consuming less power, I mean, let's face it, AMD is really, really done well with their energy efficiency on their Ryzen line of CPUs so far. Now, taking the integrated GPU into account, we are seeing a little bit more power draw off of the AMD CPUs versus their Intel counterparts, but this is to be expected for the massive, massive increase in performance. Just think about that IPC difference between, the Intel HD graphics and the Vega graphics there. The amount of performance you get for those extra 5 watts here is ridiculous when you really think about it. And as I alluded to earlier, the faster your DDR4 with the Ryzen APU, especially if you're using the integrated graphics, that's what Steve was doing here, Csgo at 720p. At 2133 dual channel memory, it just kind of scales up. You get anywhere from 6 to 8% performance for each jump. So the 2933 is pretty solid, but if you can get to that 3200, that seems to be the way to go. Obviously, he had to loosen up his timings a little bit here, and the performance gain wasn't that much higher. So if you can push even further, the higher these frame rates are going to go. I mean, that's just the way it is. On all APUs, they are memory bandwidth starved because they're limited to dual channel, and compared to GDDR5, this is very, very slow. So the faster the memory you can get in there, the faster it's going to run. It's just that simple. Now, for shits and giggles, he decided to do single channel versus dual channel, and, well, there's really no comparison. You are cutting your memory bandwidth in half, and that's going to have massive, massive performance decreases because of that. So I would not be running any of these in a single channel configuration unless you absolutely have to and there's no other option. Well, alrighty, guys. I mean, that's just a brief overview. There's tons of information out there. Everybody's done their own reviews. I just kind of wanted to go over a couple of numbers that really stuck out to me. The fact that the 2200G and the 8100 are they're so close in performance that it pretty much doesn't matter. And that the fact that the 2400G could actually keep pace with the 6-core 8400, that's really nice. Now, if you used a GTX 1080 Ti, the 8400 would be much stronger overall, but there's actually some reasons for that, and I'm going to go over that here in a minute. But to finish off with Ryzen, I think the APUs are really good. They're really strong. They're really efficient. And at the end of the day, I think that these are great value CPUs. And if you're building in this crazy market and you want to start with something more budget friendly and then work your way up, this is a great solution, because you can go anywhere from a 4-core, 4-thread CPU with a Vega GPU integrated for only $100, which is nuts when you really think about the value proposition there. And then you can upgrade later on all the way to an 8-core, 16-thread CPU at a minimum. So the Ryzen platform, the AM4 platform, has so much breathing room for growth that it really makes it hard to recommend the Intel platform that's limited to only 6 cores and 12 threads. Now, that's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I actually was going to add that into the last video because I think that this is important. If you're buying a system, you really have to know what it is that you want to do with it. There's a lot of people that just want the fastest today and will upgrade tomorrow. But if you're one of those people like myself that likes to take their PC and then repurpose it, turn it into a media PC for the living room, give it to your wife. That's one of the things that I would like to do, is give her a PC after it steps down. Give it to a kid. You use it for some other purpose. So you want it to last for a long, long time. Looking at the platform is critical. And limiting your upgrade path to only 6 cores and 12 threads, I think, is being very short-sighted. And this is one of the reasons why I don't like the Z370 platform. The Z390 will support up to 8-core 16 threads if rumors are to be believed. And I think if you want to go with Intel, that's the platform to go with. And I think you'll be fine at that point. But until that comes out, AMD has the much better platform. You could start very inexpensive. B350 boards are starting at like $60. So you can get one of those, or maybe like $80 for a decent one. So somewhere in there. So only $60 to $80 for a decent motherboard, $100 for a decent CPU to get started. RAM's stupid expensive. Nothing to be done about that. Nothing AMD has any part in. Just is what it is. Past the RAM and GPUs being absolutely crazy, your motherboard and your CPU costs are very low. And then later on, if you needed, like I said, up to 8 cores and 16 thread performance, which in the near future I think we'll need once the new generation of consoles come out, and that's something I'll touch on once again here in just a sec. I think that will be able to get you anywhere from 5 to 10 years life out of your system. It really just depends on what your use case is. If it's mostly for gaming, I think that an 8-core 16 thread will get you through the next generation of consoles. So probably 5, 7, maybe even 10 years. So that would be really awesome. And that's a huge value considering you can get started on that platform for only $160. So if you really think about it, that's great. And these CPUs just completely eliminate the need for the Ryzen 3 1200 or 1300X. The 1400 Ryzen 5 1400 and 1500X. I wouldn't even look at those. You might as well just spend, actually they're less or equal to in price than those. So you might as well just get the ones with the Vega graphics, even if you don't intend to use it. Now, I keep alluding to, let's talk about this in a sec. I want to talk about next generation consoles because that's really where I think things, if you're looking towards the future of gaming, PC gaming, that's where developers are going to be looking. And they're going to be developing their next generation engines to run on next generation consoles. I mean, that's just the way it works. And from what we can kind of guess, we're pretty much expecting to see an 8-core 16-thread Ryzen-based CPU, likely a Ryzen 2 or a Zen 2 architecture on 7 nanometers. I mean, if we go back and look at the Ryzen 7 1700, we can see how low the power draw is compared to comparable, CPUs. I mean, this is very good. You get 8 cores and 16 threads. This also isn't the most efficient silicon. That'd be the Ryzen 7 1800X. but this does run at lower clock speeds to keep its efficiency high, but we're looking at something that's more efficient than Intel's 6-core 6-thread CPU. Now, why is this important? The reason why I'm saying that is once we drop down to 7 nanometer, these targets will go down even further. The amount of efficiency gain that they can get at a 7 nanometer is rather staggering. They should be able to get anywhere from about 30 to 40%. And if they could knock off 40% of their power consumption off of this, they can get a very efficient 8-core 16-thread APU into the next-gen consoles. And when looking at things like that, I mean, it makes sense. They'll be able to build them very small. Likely 8-core 16-thread will also be a single CCX at that point. So you won't even have the CCX interconnect. So they can build very small die and then attach it, obviously, a very big, GPU to it, just like they do with the current consoles. And very similar to the APUs, just with a bigger GPU. And that makes a lot of sense because all of the current variants of your two main consoles, PlayStation and Xbox, are 8-core AMD CPUs. I mean, they're just different clock speeds. And sticking with an 8-core CPU will allow them to just carry everything over. There won't be any optimization really needed due to the fact that Ryzen Zen itself is just so much more efficient than the old bulldozer architecture. It can just brute force any optimizations that may have been done on the older AMD CPU. It'll just handle it. It'll just work. So that makes a lot of sense from that perspective. Now, from a PC gamer's perspective, why does that matter? It matters because games will be targeting 8 cores and 16 threads at that point. Now, games today are starting to target 8 threads, is really what it is. But they don't target 8 AMD threads. Today's game engines are not Ryzen optimized. You can see 4-core 8-thread Intel CPUs do well, and then you see a 4-core 8-thread Ryzen CPU not do as well. It'll have lower minimum frame rates and 1% lows and all that, and this is even at relatively equal speeds. And this really started to stand out to me when I saw the Final Fantasy 15 numbers here on Gamers Nexus. Once again, check the link in the description below. But this isn't the first time that we've seen when SMT is disabled, we saw higher performance. Destiny 2 was another example of this, and it got me thinking as to why. And simply put, using the hyperthreading or SMT is not helping the AMD CPUs, but it is helping the Intel CPUs. Now, this isn't just some conspiracy, and it's not an Intel fault or whatever. It's just that the game engines are designed with that. I mean, the Sandy Bridge ring bus architecture, that's what we're still seeing in Coffee Lake. So a 2011 architecture still being used by Intel. I'll let you mull that over for a second. But still, I mean, basically you've had all that time, all the optimizations for that CPU over the years, and the fact that Intel is the most popular CPU that there is, especially over the past decade or so. I mean, that's just where things went. They were just optimized for that. And with the consoles having 8 cores, and Intel not offering 8-core CPUs to their mainstream, the masses did not have access to that, but they did have access to 8-thread CPUs. So obviously the game optimizations towards 8-thread Intel CPUs have come to fruition. I've done a lot of videos on that saying, Core i5s are kind of getting pushed to the side. The reason for that is because as console hardware was fully utilized, all 8 CPU cores were really being worked on those consoles. The only way developers could really utilize that level of CPU power on a PC was through the hyperthreading, because how many people actually had an 8-core Intel CPU over the past 5 years? Few people bought the 5960X, the Haswell X, but that's a very small group of people. Now, AMD, on the other hand, have offered 8-core CPUs at a very reasonable price. You can get Ryzen 7 1700s for about $200, $220. I've seen them go for very, very reasonable prices here recently. And honestly, there's really no rush for them to optimize for their SMT right now. It makes more sense for them to wait and make sure that the new consoles are going to be Ryzen-based, because the Ryzen CPUs have enough actual cores that they don't really need the optimization. 6 cores or 8 cores is going to be more than enough to really run an 8-threaded game just fine. Now, like I said, once game engines are designed for the next-gen consoles, and if they do have a Ryzen-based CPU, an 8-core 16-thread CPU moving forward will be preferable. So tying this all together with the Ryzen APUs, I know I'm kind of all over the place with this, but I wanted to get these thoughts out. This is something I've been thinking about for a while. The Raven Ridge APUs are a great starting point, and then you can upgrade. So the longevity is going to be there for you as we go forward. Now, a 6-core, 12-thread CPU, something like the 8700K, is much more powerful today on today's games in today's game engines because of the fact that the games are more optimized for that CPU. Now, as time goes on, you have the Ryzen, let's say 1800X, for example, at 4 gigahertz, and the 8700K at 5 gigahertz. The Ryzen CPU has 25% more cores, and the Intel CPU has 25% higher clock speed. Now, it's not one-to-one, but at the end of the day, once games are designed with Ryzen optimizations, especially next-gen games, next-gen consoles, if I'm correct, that difference in performance will level off, and they'll be basically identical. And we're seeing it already on a lot of professional applications, which take advantage of whatever resources are possible. So that's the reason why you see the 8100 being very close to the 2200G, and you do see the 4-core 8-thread Ryzen 2400G being on par or close to the i5 8400. Being in the same ballpark with that CPU. Now, in gaming, they're not going to be anywhere near as good because those extra cores from Intel, it's just more optimized. In the future, though, that optimization, that extra level that they have will go away. And AMD has shown that they've been able to reduce their cache size and not lose performance. As you saw, the APUs are competing with, the 1500X versus the 2400G, and they're very much neck and neck through most of the benchmarks, even though it has half the L3 cache. So with these extra cache level optimizations being put into their future CPUs, that difference between AMD and Intel is going to shrink. It's going to start disappearing as time goes on. And with Zen 2 moving to 7 nanometers and Intel going to 10 nanometers, according to AMD, the difference between manufacturing process will eventually disappear. Right now, they admit that Intel has a more efficient manufacturing process. Their 14 nanometer plus or plus plus is better than their 14 nanometer. AMD's 12 nanometer will be closer to Intel's 14 nanometer plus plus. And then what they feel is their 7 nanometer will be almost as good as Intel's 10 nanometer. And once that happens, we're going to see them basically neck and neck. I don't think either company is going to have a huge advantage over the other. And then it's just going to come down to pricing. So what's really great is we're going to see them beat the hell out of each other, and prices should come down once that happens. Intel doesn't like to compete, but they will lose a lot of market share when they're on a more even playing field there. So I just want to throw that all out there. That's a lot of things to consider. The platforms today that you have are more important than what CPU you can get. Your upgradability and your upgrade path is really what you need to be looking at. So it's not to say that Coffee Lake's bad. I'm just saying I wouldn't go with the Z370. Make sure you can get a platform that has at least an 8-core 16-thread limit there, because if you have a 6-core 12-thread CPU running at 5 gigahertz, you have a console running an 8-core 16-thread CPU around 3 gigahertz. That'd be my guess on the 7 nanometer. So basically a Ryzen 7 1700, and that's running a game at only 30 frames per second because it's CPU limited. That 6-core 12-thread CPU is not going to have enough horsepower to push that game to 60 frames per second. Having an 8-core 16-thread CPU running at 5 gigahertz, that might be able to get it there. So it just depends on game developers and programmers. There's a lot of ifs and thens in this particular scenario. That's just smart buying, in my opinion, if you're out there in the market right now. And these new APUs just really make it such a great value to get into the AMD platform at this particular point in time. So much value there. You don't have to even buy a GPU right away. You can play some games. Yeah, it might be 720p, medium, low. But at the very least, you can play them. Whereas, discrete graphics cards, just let them come down, back down to earth. RAM prices, like I said, we're all kind of screwed on that one. Well, let me know what you guys think. Let me know, what you guys think about thinking that far ahead. Do you plan that far? Do you want your system to last 5-10 years down the road? Is that something that you even consider? Or do you prefer, every 2 or 3 years just saying screw it and just building a new system? Or maybe that's just the way your upgrade cycle works. Let me know in the comments section below. And let me know what you guys think about these new APUs. I think that they're great, but what do you think? And I wanted to thank all of you guys for showing your support. And I want to promise you that I will try to make at least 1 or 2 videos a month at the very least, if possible. Like I said, I just can't gauge how I'm going to feel once I'm working all the time like that. But I will do my best to stick here with you and give you my thoughts on new products that are coming out. And I may even try that affiliate program. Somebody mentioned that. So if I'm talking about something that you're interested in, like these Ryzen CPUs, you might want to check the link in the description. There might be affiliate links, and that would really help me out. Maybe I could dump that part-time job. Let me know what you guys think about that as well. Are you cool with affiliate links, or is that something that you're just like, I don't want to do that? That's not, it's not your thing. I'm just kind of curious. I don't know. I don't click on them myself, so I'm wondering what you guys think. Well, alrighty, guys, that's all I have for today, and I will catch you guys in the next video.